All right, so we should be recording now. So welcome everybody, and thanks for taking some time to join us today. For those that don't know me, my name is Wes Barefoot, Director of Franchise Development with ShelfGenie, and really the purpose of these spotlight calls that we're doing is just to give anybody that's interested in learning more about ShelfGenie and our franchise opportunity the chance to hear from some of the different folks that are involved in the organization, and particularly some of our different franchise partners. And really just give you an opportunity to kind of, hear a little bit from them and pick their brain. So, the goal here is really to create a good forum for some questions and answers, and just another way for you to get some exposure to some different people within the organization. So with that, we've got Bret Chevrier joining us today. I won't steal too much of Bret's thunder. I'll pass it to him here in just a minute to give a little bit of background on himself. You didn't know I had that picture of you, did you, Bret?
There's a lot less gray hair in that picture.
Yeah. It was one of several pictures I had to choose from, so I chose the more appropriate of the ones that I had. So, but Bret's been a franchise partner with ShelfGenie since 2009. He's based out of Florida, and you can see on the screen here kind of where his different territories or markets are. And I'll let Bret here in just a minute give some background on himself. But, Bret's been very involved in ShelfGenie ever since joining. He's a wealth of knowledge for anyone that is interested in picking his brain and learning what to do, and also maybe in one or two instances what not to do, just over the years of the experience that he's gathered. So we'll open it up to questions here in a little bit. There's also a chat box. So if you have questions kind of as Bret's talking, feel free to shoot a message over in the chat box, and we can get to it that way as well. But I'm going to kind of mute everybody else and then pass it over to Bret. But we'll open it up for questions here in a little bit as well. So that being said, Bret, thanks again, man, for joining us today. Appreciate you taking some time. Maybe kind of start out just by, sharing a little bit of your background, what you did prior to ShelfGenie, kind of leading up to ShelfGenie, and then, anything, personal that may be helpful just for people on the call to get a sense of kind of where you're coming from.
Sure. So most of my career was actually spent in the financial services industry, specifically with Capital One. And actually worked with our Boston franchisees, Jeff Cohen and Rafi Iskandarian in Boston. And specifically, I was in sales and sales management. So we did products, finance products for elective medical. So if you we're going to get a orthodontia or an expensive dental procedure, Capital One would finance that. And so as 2008 happened, since we were kind of a smaller brand or a smaller piece of that big brand, we were actually shut down. So for me at that point in time, I mean, I looked for jobs, but I had grown up in a small business. So my dad was I was a landscaping contractor, and for me, I loved the fact that he had tons of flexibility. So he may work 60 hours a week, but he worked the hours he wanted to work. Got to do all the, the coaching, the kids' soccer games, the vacations, all that stuff. He didn't miss any of that. So as I sort of thought through, my next thing, small business, or at that point I was looking at a bunch of different small business options, but that seemed to be the way I wanted to go. Actually found ShelfGenie through Jeff and Rafi up in Boston. They had purchased the Boston market. And we had been sharing back and forth what we were looking for. And so they sort of had recommended ShelfGenie. And for me, it was really hit on a lot of the things that I wanted, which was quality product. I don't want to sell cheap stuff. I want something that's really good. Flexibility, I was not tied to a store 7 days a week. At that time, I did not have any children. Now I have 4, so I knew that I was going to need the flexibility, or want that flexibility, and I wanted something that was a bit like kind of an emerging. There weren't 5 million shelf companies. I didn't want to get into sort of a saturated market where price was really the big differentiation. I wanted to kind of get into something that was kind of new and interesting and actually helping people. So, I think I signed my paperwork December 15th, 2009. I don't think it was even a month after I started looking at the business. So.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's, pretty common with a lot of the folks that are considering, a franchise, whether it's ShelfGenie or something else. They've had a career in the corporate world, and, for one reason or another, they're at a crossroads in their life and making some other considerations. So, maybe talk a little bit about what it was like to make that transition from, kind of working in the corporate world, in your case with Capital One, to becoming a small business owner, and what changes you had to kind of go through, and what was difficult about it, and what's been rewarding about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of a few different sides to this. So I look at like my time at Capital One, and they were sort of a very they see everything had to be sort of information based. So it was a very data driven company, which because of the back end that ShelfGenie set up with Wish Portal, allowed me to sort of leverage that skill set, or kind of how we did things there, which was great. I think the interesting part about going from being someone in a corporate environment to being a small business owner is, you kind of have to wear a bunch of different hats. I mean, you're the CEO and president, right? So you can put that on your business card, but you're also the sales manager, and some days the janitor, and some days the measure tech. Especially early, there's quite a bit of things you have to do. I think it's a bit of a, whereas before maybe I had an admin to do things for me, and in the early days you're just doing everything yourself. So that was both exciting, but also a little bit humbling, I'd say. I think from when you become a business owner and it's coming out of everything's coming out of your pocket, it just requires a little bit of extra discipline. I mean, you really need to make sure that you're focusing on the right things, that you're doing what's going to give you the best return, because those dollars, are your dollars, and they're not just part of a $5 million budget. They're coming out of your pocket. But that's, to me, where the franchising was extremely helpful, because I didn't have to do everything. So we had the call center, the business support center to answer our phone calls. We had a marketing team who had already figured out what was working, what didn't work, to provide me with the guidance. The back end with the Wish Portal was already done. The hiring profiles were already done. So you really got a huge head start. So I kind of feel like it's the best of both worlds. You are your own boss, but you've got some of that infrastructure that's similar to what you're coming from in a corporate environment.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm going to stick to what I said earlier and keep Andy muted. But if he was unmuted right now, he'd probably say something along the lines of, you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself, which right. I think is very true. Yeah. And so maybe to circle back to one thing you mentioned earlier, because I think it's key. And again, Sharon and I haven't had a chance to really dive in yet. We're going to do that later this afternoon. So, some of this may be a little out of context for her, but other folks will be listening to this, going forward. So, I mean, in your experience, you make a great point. As the owner, you need to focus on the right things for the owner to focus on. So in your experience, what are those kind of key things in a business like this that the owner should be, putting most of their time and energy into, where they are going to get the best return on that investment of their time?
Yeah. This may be a slightly long-winded answer, but in my view, there are really four things that you need to be focused on every day, and that is your number of leads that you have coming in, or number of appointments, how efficiently you're getting those appointments. So what's your cost? So it's much better to get 10 leads out of $1,000 than it is to get 2 leads out of $1,000. And then, how well is your team converting those leads into happy clients? And how good of a job are they doing on the design? Because the better they do on the design, the bigger the project size. So if you kind of look at your day and you find that you're spending a large portion of your day not focused on one of those four things, you are most likely focusing on the wrong thing. And so those, the activities that may include maybe, meeting with our marketing department to analyze results, or, come up with some new ideas. That could be negotiating with a current vendor. That could be, and which should be a lot of time in recruiting. So you're constantly looking for good designers, getting out in the field with them, seeing what they're doing, helping them, collecting best practices, helping them get better at their job, running sales trainings. So those are the things that you really need to do to be successful. It's not to say that there won't be other things you'll have to do, admin and things, but I'm a huge believer in the 80-20 rule. And you better be, 80% of your results are going to come from 20% of where you're spending your time. And it really falls down to those kind of four things. And so if you're not spending a good amount of time there, you're working on the wrong stuff. And in addition, if you don't like doing those things, this is probably not the right franchise for you. So if you enjoy coaching and hiring and recruiting and getting people from a point of kind of a novice to an expert, and you like seeing other people grow and professionally develop, this will be awesome for you. I mean, you'll kill it and you'll love it. But if you don't, there might be other opportunities out there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know it's something that I try to stress with candidates is the importance of, really developing a good team. I mean, it's one of the keys to scaling, any sort of a business. And that's, really the goal that we have here at ShelfGenie through the model that we've created is, to provide this scalable opportunity for our franchise partners. And, having that team in place is absolutely critical to that. It's also one of the things that, for the owner can lead to a more flexible lifestyle. And I think that's a big part of what most people are looking for if they are considering something like a franchise is, how can I, and for people, most people, it's not that they're trying to avoid working hard. It's just that they want to be able to work hard, but do it on their own terms. And, so I know in this business, especially, the better of a team you have out on the field, the more flexible it becomes for the owner. At least the opportunity for that flexibility is there. Again, not that you're not putting in the time and working hard. You're just able to do it a little more so on your own terms.
Yeah, I think that's you have your business working for you. And I think a prime example is I got engaged the year before I bought the business, and so I knew we were getting married, and we went on like a 2.5 week honeymoon.
Yeah.
So, and this was all within a year, not even a year, 9 months of purchasing the business. And I was able to truly unplug, and I was able to. I had my team in place. I actually kind of showed one person how to approve orders and use Wish Portal, and I checked in a couple times, but you're really able to sort of step away. If you do the work of building the team, certainly.
Yeah, and it's not easy work by any means. And I want to circle back to this in a minute because I want to pick your brain a little bit in terms of, what you would recommend as some best practices for recruiting designers and installers. But before we do that, just to give a little perspective, because, we've got on the screen here some of the different markets or territories that you own. And I mean, you've built a pretty big business over the last 10 years or so. But maybe give a little context to that. You have what, 5 or 6 territories now?
You have 5. Yep.
5, but you didn't start out with.
Yeah, 5. No, I started out with, I bought one, and then I bought the second one like a couple of months later. I was new to the area, so I just wasn't sure which one to buy. I think if I look in retrospect, I probably should have bought more earlier, to be honest. Because if you think about this business, it's there's really no overhead. So every time I buy a new territory, it's not like I'm have a $250,000 build out or something. I mean, it's just you
Right.
buy a territory and you start marketing. And so because you're kind of operating on a really low overhead, kind of each additional territory you purchase or the additional revenue is really kind of falling to the bottom line. So I ran with 2 territories through, I think, 2016, and then I purchased Fort Myers and Naples area, and then a little bit more of the Palm Beach area about a year ago. But it just makes sense because it's really no more difficult to run 5 territories than it is 2. Everything's, you got to hire a few more designers, but it's all the same, right? The marketing plan is generally the same. The profile is the same. You're using the same system. So from a scalability perspective, it's good because it's not, again, there's not the build out. There's not as much complications as like with a brick and mortar.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a little more lean than a lot of businesses out there. And, Sharon, and for anyone else listening into the call later, I think you'll find that's relatively common, amongst ShelfGenie franchise owners. We have a lot of what we would call multi-unit or multi-territory owners. And a big part of that is just due to the overhead. And we'll go into a little more detail in our call later today, about kind of what leads to that, the kind of low overhead nature of this business. But circling back to one of your points from earlier, Bret, I think, expanding that way is a lot easier if, as an owner, you are focused on the right things. If you're focused on recruiting and developing your team, it becomes a lot easier to add territory and cover more area because you'll, be more likely to kind of be able to replicate the team that you've already built out and, maybe some of those initial territories. So just to kind of, reiterate the point that Bret made earlier is that you got to really be focusing on the right things. We kind of think about it in terms of, working on your business instead of in it. If you're working in your business and getting bogged down with too much of the day-to-day and kind of administrative aspects of it, then you don't have the capacity to focus on the things that will allow you to continue to grow and expand your business. And, one of the things we focus on a lot from the home office perspective is making sure that we're providing meaningful, ongoing support for the franchise partners. So we can take a lot of that, kind of in some cases monotonous, the day-to-day aspects of managing the business off the plate. And we'll, probably talk through some of that in more detail as we go on. But let me just kind of, pause right there because this has been great stuff so far, Bret. But let me just kind of see, Sharon, do you have any specific questions for Bret at this time?
The designers, did you initially, so when you started out, you hired designers and installers even with the first territory?
So was the question is did I kind of do some of the design work? Is that what your question was?
Yeah, I wanted to know if you hired them right off the bat, or did you do it? Yeah.
Yeah. So I hired an installer right off the bat. I'm probably the least handy person in the world.
I might be a close second.
It's pretty difficult for me. So I hired an installer right off the bat. And then I did, probably most of the design work myself for the first few months, just from a perspective of really getting, pretty good at it, making sure I could teach it. But again, I knew I had a kind of a deadline of having a team in place because I was going to be gone for close to a month. So I started hiring right away, within the first few months.
Okay, so you train the designers.
Correct. And that's, excuse me, that's really one of the main part of the role. There's lots of good training material for, there's lots of good training material, lots of good support, but one of the main roles of the franchise owner is to kind of recruit, train, and mentor the design team.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to give a little context, when it comes to the installers, they all come to Atlanta where the home office is based and go through a training and certification program. So, the majority of the training, especially the more technical aspects of the training for installers, is handled by the home office. And then it is more of a train the trainer approach with designers. I think it's, we encourage all of our new franchise partners to get out there and, run some design appointments initially, even if the plan long-term is not to, be a designer yourself and run a lot of appointments. I mean, I think long-term, that's more working in the business and own the business if you're spending too much of your time as an owner running design appointments. But initially, it's great to get out there and get that experience so you do understand the process, and it will put you in a better position to recruit and train. And, to Bret's point, we do have a lot of resources available to franchise partners to help them in these efforts, and even offer a training once a month that designers can come to Atlanta for. But that training is really not designed to be their initial training, but more of a supplemental training, maybe after they've been in the field for at least a couple of months and have some appointments under their belt. So, Bret, I don't know if you want to, if you're done choking, I don't know if you want to add to that or expand on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sending 3 of my current designers to training next week. I mean, I've trained them, they're proficient, but, getting a couple days of training with Scott, who maybe they're going to pick up something, getting the ability to do a little bit of role playing and then, enhance their skills at our 3D design, for me just feels like a good investment. But I'm not going to invest in them until I know they've kind of got the basics down and, and can at least are proficient. So.
Yeah. And maybe, well, go ahead, Sharon.
No, I was just, we'll finish this up because I was going to go on to something else.
Sure. I was going to just circle back to Bret because this is something I did want to pick his brain on a little bit was, where have you had success finding good designers and installers over the years? Because, I think you'll find, Sharon, as you have the opportunity to talk with other owners throughout this process, that there's definitely different approaches to recruiting. I mean, there are certainly kind of some universal best practices for our business, but different owners have different approaches, and Bret has done a good job over the years of, developing teams, but I'm sure you've also had challenges along the way. So maybe share some of your best practices when it comes to recruiting and specifically where to find people that are good fits for these roles.
Yep. I made a shift a few years ago to, I used to just like run ads in Craigslist because I'd had some early success with that. And the problem I saw is it was usually sort of hot or cold. So now I treat recruiting a bit more like my marketing plan. So I do Craigslist, I do Indeed, but we also do things like reaching back to past clients, looking for people who might want to work with us. Another thing that I layer on is I'll just call all my advertisers. One of the things about the advertisers is that they're usually salespeople, so they know a lot of other people who could be potential designers. From an installation perspective, they're calling on small businesses all the time, so they know people who have kind of just maybe started a handyman company. So I actually find that if I make a round of calls to my advertisers or partners, that I usually at least get a few names. So I kind of view it as just like marketing. If I run 10 things from anything from TV to newspaper, sometimes the newspaper doesn't work that week, but the TV does. And so if you're constantly using a mix of ways to find designers and installers, you'll kind of get consistent results. I think the other key is recruiting even when you don't necessarily need people. So you may not be sending something out every week. You may go to every, once a month, but you never know when your designer is going to hit the lottery, or the husband's going to move and get a different job, or they decide to retire, or for whatever reason they had great results and then they hit some sort of a personal problem and they went down the hill. So by constantly keeping that funnel full, you're you're going to be in a position of strength.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Go ahead, Sharon.
So they're usually not full-time positions. They're just on an as-needed basis, or how do you secure their income?
Most of the people that work with me, and not all, we are a piece of their kind of mini business. So they may be an installer for ShelfGenie and also install closets. So generally speaking, they may be a part-time designer and either do other part-time work, or they only want part-time work. So it's usually, in most cases, not a full-time person.
Okay.
Yeah, most of our franchise partners, Sharon, use a 1099 model when it comes to their designers and installers. So not all, but most have them on more of a commission-only type compensation structure. Yep. And this is where some strategy can kind of really come into recruiting, because I think if you are strategic about it, using this 1099 model, not only is it good for your overhead purposes, right, where you don't have a fixed payroll where you're writing checks, even if the revenue may not be there to support it. But in addition to that, I think it opens the door to recruit better talent to your team if you know where to look. And Bret hit on, something that's fairly common throughout the system, especially with installers, where, a lot of installers that you'll see, they are small business owners themselves. And, maybe it's a handyman business or a remodeling business or something of that nature, but they look at ShelfGenie and doing installations for ShelfGenie as a way that they can supplement their income or create another revenue stream for their business. And then from a franchise owner's perspective, and maybe Bret, you can expand on this based on your experience, but and a lot of times you're dealing with someone in that scenario that already owns a business and is more likely to be able to, essentially handle the entire installation side of your business without you as an owner having to be too hands-on or too involved. But what's your experience been with that, Bret?
Yeah, I think that's, the couple of things. One, when an installer walks into a ShelfGenie job, it's already sold, right? So they're walking into sort of guaranteed revenue. Installing ShelfGenie glide outs is not very difficult. So like on a per hour basis, the guys do very well. The key thing is to keep it going is you need two things. You need somebody who is extremely reliable. So you need someone who's going to call the customer within 48 hours, who's going to show up when they say they're going to, or call if they're running late. So you need a good communicator, and you need somebody with the right skill set. And so what we find is that the guys who are kind of have their own little business and who are used to, maybe the right way to say it, like hustling for their work and having to keep happy customers, seem to be the best fit. And because they have to go to this training and we require them to make the investment to do that, they also see this as an opportunity, as a revenue stream, and not just as a job. So I found that model has been great. Now, that doesn't mean I haven't had a few port hires, because I have. But generally speaking, I'd say probably 80% of the people I've brought on have actually been really good, and the first gentleman I hired in 2009 is still with me today. I think the average tenure is probably over 3 years. So they, because of the work and the type of people we're looking for, they usually stick for quite a while.
Good. Talk to me about your marketing plan.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get help from the franchise in developing that, and how did you determine what you needed? How did you need it to market the product?
Yep. So lots of help. One of the things that as you learn and talk with Wes, you'll understand is we are a very data-driven company. So any anything from a business card to a brochure to an advertisement to a car wrap will have its own unique 800 number. So when that call comes in, they know where it came from, how much we invested in it, and have all this this data, for the last 12 years or so collected. So so they were able to say to me, we've done some research. Here are the vehicles that are available in your area, based on the results we've seen with similar media. Here's kind of what our recommendation is, and so and here's kind of what your budget would look like. So very lots of help. Now you're still going to have to you're still going to find like the little local things that the team might not know about, and you're still going to probably track down some of the events and home shows in your area, but you're going to get a marketing plan, or at least marketing suggested plan that's probably 80% built for you. And then ultimately, kind of how I decide what I need is, I kind of look and say, well, what's my goal? How many appointments do I need to hit that goal? And then ultimately, how much do I need to invest? And then I'll, say to our marketing team, or even on my own, like, we've got to go find another $30,000 and spend somewhere. How do we go do that? So lots of help on that aspect. I think that's probably one of our key strengths.
Talk a little bit about the reporting that you have access to, so that over time you can really evaluate where you're currently spending, what type of a return you're getting on those different marketing vehicles, and when you may know it's time to shift the strategy up a little bit.
So as I mentioned before, everything has its own sort of unique phone number, so it gets recorded in our Wish portal system, and then you have access to reports which will show you, kind of what you spent versus how many leads came in versus how many appointments versus what was sold. So as you monitor that, maybe say like kind of rolling 3-month kind of basis, you can look and say, hey, well, this is really working. Maybe we should invest more dollars there or increase frequency. Or, hey, this is really stinking it up. We either need to, change our offer or renegotiate to get something a bit, try to save a little bit of money. So there's just lots of transparency into kind of what's working, what's not. And that gives you a lot of power, both sort of with, really with advertisers, to be honest. I mean, our media team will do some negotiating for you, but on some of the local stuff, I've just walked in with my report and said, okay, we've been doing this for 4 months. My normal return is, X, and yours is coming in, quite a bit less than that at Y. If we lowered my price 20%, I'd be willing to sign a 12-month agreement. It's numbers, and it's real concrete. So it really helps you kind of figure out where to allocate your dollars. Sharon, was that helpful? Am I answering your question?
Yeah, I think, I'm a blank slate. So,
yeah. Well, maybe give us some examples.
So you do your own, you do some of your own marketing and determining where, and so does that, you set, when you do your budget, if you will, you'll set aside marketing dollars, and then you determine if you're going to run various ads or, in different media.
Yeah, generally, just to tell you kind of what our process looks like, we'll kind of, towards the end of the year, we'll do a review with our marketing team, and we'll see like what's going well.
So this is ShelfGenie's marketing team, correct, not specifically your, okay.
Correct. So
you don't have a marketing
team? No, I don't. My marketing team is the ShelfGenie marketing team.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I was.
Yeah. So we'll kind of take a look at what worked well, what didn't work well, and we really build a plan together. So as to kind of what the year looks like, and then we do quarterly reviews. And usually out of a coming out of a year, 80% of the stuff stays the same, and then there'll be sort of to-dos for each party. So I may have to go to someone local and try to renegotiate something or increase frequency, and they may use some of their contacts on a national perspective. And but there's a lot of guidance, and it's a very collaborative process.
Okay.
Yeah, and
so you don't use any social media or anything yourself to promote your
no. Some people do that on their own. We have a vendor that we use for pay-per-click, social media, etc. I utilize them. I'm between 4 kids and 5 territories. I try to use every bit of help I can.
Yeah, that's smart, Carl. I'm sure that's the best thing to do.
Well, and that's a key point I was getting ready to bring up because, Sharon, you've heard a little bit about Bret's background. Our franchise partners come from all types of different backgrounds, and some of them may have some marketing experience based on their previous, careers. Others are a total blank slate when it comes to marketing. And so, one of the things that I think our team does a pretty good job of is, working with a individual franchise owner in whatever capacity, they're asked to, right? So for an owner that maybe does have a little more experience in marketing, they're probably going to want to be a little more involved in determining the strategy and even implementing some of it. And then for others, it's more, hey, what do you recommend based on what you kind of know about our market and what historically has worked well for ShelfGenie? And then let's come up with a strategy based on that. The key to understand, though, is however involved an owner wants to be in, determining what the marketing strategy is, you have a team behind you to implement and execute the strategy, so that your time as an owner is not spent trying to get artwork to an advertiser that's going to run an ad for you, or trying to do all the reporting and the analytics that go with it. You have a team that can really kind of execute all of that for you, again freeing your time as an owner up to focus on some of the things that Bret mentioned earlier, the type of things that are more likely to move the needle for your business. So those are great questions. But Bret, maybe give her just a couple of examples of where you do currently spend some of your marketing dollars.
Sure. I mean, we do some real traditional stuff like newspaper advertising. Newspaper still is a part of our mix because our target market is kind of baby boomers plus. So there's a certain section of the market that continues to read the paper. More traditional things like Valpak or 4-color coupon magazines. Home shows is not as big a part of my particular marketing plan, but if you look across the organization, home shows and events are a real big lead generator, because we've got such a great product and people touch it and feel it. It really helps. We do social media, pay-per-click, some retargeting, along with things like referral programs and referral partnerships, et cetera. So it really is kind of across the board, quite a few different things. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was very helpful.
And we've even done, during our busy months down here, which is in the wintertime, we'll do some TV as well, which is when all the snowbirds are here. So.
I have a friend that just moved, and I'll have to see if she needs some ShelfGenies.
Absolutely, we'll take good care of her.
There you go. Yeah, and it's kind of like with recruiting, you'll find Sharon, that there are different approaches across the system for marketing. Some of it is more related to the actual market itself and where you are in the country. Some of it may just be that particular owner's approach or style. And I know you don't really know any of my background yet, and we'll get into some of this later, but my wife and I are franchise owners as well, and we've been open for less than a year. So we came in and didn't quite know where to start from a marketing standpoint. And the team was able to, sit down with us, look at our market specifically, and then, based on just all the experience that they have at this point, kind of give us a recommendation as where would be a good starting point for our marketing and advertising. And then, that's evolved a little bit over the last 9 or 10 months since we opened our franchise, just based on the results that we're able to see through the reporting and the analytics. So I think it's a great topic to ask any of the franchise owners that you have the opportunity to speak with as we work through this process. So thank you for that.
Sharon, one of the things I will sort of recommend to you, whether you choose ShelfGenie or another franchise, is, you're buying a system, you're buying the knowledge, you're buying that's sort of what you're buying. So, there will be nuances and differences to your market, but initially just, kind of blindly follow. Really just, utilize the resources you have, listen to what the team is saying, and then, you'll figure out the nuances, as you're in the market a bit longer. But one of the key mistakes that I made early on is I didn't follow the advice to get into newspapers, and my thought process was, well, newspapers are dead, and that's what you hear everywhere. Newspapers are dead. Newspapers are dead. So it took our director of marketing probably close to a year of beating me over the head. And then as soon as I layered that in, it was my number one producer. And so my thick-headedness, my sort of like thinking I knew things, I was, I used to manage a $500 million loan portfolio. I'm really smart. And it was just really stupid. So just, utilize, you're buying into a franchise for a reason. So definitely kind of blindly follow at first, because it really will help you. Don't be a knucklehead like me.
Well, the resources are there, so it makes sense to use them. And I am a blank slate, because marketing is, I know enough to be dangerous.
That would put you in the same boat as the majority of our franchise owners, honestly. And kind of our mentality when a new franchise owner comes in is that they are a blank slate. And if they have some more knowledge in a particular area, that's just going to give them more of an edge.
Yeah.
But hey, Bret, did the marketing director beat you over the head with a newspaper? Because that'd be ironic.
I think if I was physically,
would he have like rolled up a newspaper and hit you in the head with it? That would have been funny.
Well, I would have thought the same thing, but given your market, you're right, because newspapers are dead in my area, but I do know my father-in-law still gets paper every day and reads it.
Yeah, and and again, none of these things are silver bullets, but when you sort of put them all together, they work. So it's
yeah, that's a good point. I think, Sharon, you will find that most of our franchise owners have a pretty comprehensive and what you might call a multi-touch point, approach to marketing, where, while we do have good reporting in place and we try as best as we can to provide that transparency to owners so they can make educated decisions, some of this stuff, it's multiple touch points and multiple exposures that ultimately drives a prospective client to pick up the phone and call, or to fill out a form online. And so, you may find out that they saw your ad in a newspaper, and then they saw you at a home show a month later, and then, they saw a Facebook ad, and ultimately they respond to the Facebook ad. But had it not been for that newspaper, it may not have kind of sparked that initial interest. So, having a good, multi-touch point approach, I think is key for something like this.
Yep. Yeah, this is a business that's not like if you build it, they will come. You definitely need to be advertising. You need to be out there because it's not like, it's not like roofing where it's like, oh, well, now I need a new roof. So I'm just going to punch in roofing into Google, and it's going to pop up. Not everyone even knows that what we do is an option for them. So you have to kind of constantly be educating people of what we do and that we're actually here. So
yeah, well, this is more of a um, I hate to, a luxury item, if you will. It's not something you have to have. It's just a nice to have if you like organization.
It's interesting you say that, because it's very dependent upon somebody's physical attributes. Are they healthy? Do they have a bad back, good, bad knees, as just well as age? So if someone who's in their 40s and is healthy calls you, this is probably more of a luxury kind of item. It probably falls a lot more with closets. It's like, I want all the bells and whistles. As people get into their 50s and 60s, it really becomes what I call like the first aging in place product. So they're like, I need to get things to make my life easier. So getting down on my hands and knees to grab my lobster pot is not only a pain, it's actually somewhat painful. And I've heard people say to me, I have a drawer for my socks, but not for my cast iron skillet. And then as you get people in their 70s and sometimes even 80s, this is literally part of the reason they're able to stay in their home. It's so interesting. It is a luxury product for those in their 40s. It's what I'd call like a justified need, or like a kind of a planning thing for people in maybe their 60s. And then as you get into older, it actually becomes a need, which is really interesting, because I would not have thought that when I was buying this. So.
Interesting perspective, and I can see that makes sense.
Yeah, that is a good point, and pretty interesting. Because I know before I got into this business, I wouldn't have really thought that either. Definitely would have thought of it more as a want-based type of product. But for a lot of these people that are looking for ways that they can try to stay in their home as long as possible, because that's where people are comfortable. If they have the option to stay, that's usually what they're going to choose to do if they can find a way. And then even if you look at some of the alternatives, moving to assisted living, or selling a house and finding another house that's maybe more suited for your needs, that can be incredibly expensive. So if you compare an option like ShelfGenie to some of those alternatives, not only is it in a lot of cases more practical, it's also more cost effective.
Yep.
Do you partner with any realtors?
So realtors are good potential partners. What we find is there are certain neighborhoods that we kind of find ourselves continually in. And so generally you'll get to know like some of the better realtors there. And so, as they kind of, and there's certain neighborhoods that have like, especially down here where it's like, they have like certain kitchen design flaws. And so the realtors will say, well, here's a couple of ways you can solve for that. And the realtors are looking, if someone doesn't like their kitchen, or they had all drawers, they can kind of use us as a way to kind of help that customer, knock that, get that knock off of their list. Companies like Closet Companies actually are really good referral partners. Professional organizers can be good. Senior move managers, people who help kind of seniors move, can be good referral partners as well. Sometimes it's less about the category and more just about the person. Do they see the value in what we do, and do they kind of get it?
Yeah, that's a good question, Sharon, because to me, that's one of the most interesting things about a business like this is just how many opportunities there are to get out and network with other professionals or other business owners that may be in a position to refer business to us. And, our business is no different than most, where, referrals are gold. So whatever we can do to stir up as much referral activity as possible, that's going to have huge impacts on your business in a good way. And I would kind of add that, into the category of some of the things Bret was mentioning earlier, as far as, what owners should be prioritizing and trying to make sure that they're spending some time on, that business development component, and making sure that you are focusing on networking and, developing some of those referral partnerships. I think that's a great use of a franchise owner's time. Again, it's relying on you having a good team in place so that you've actually got the capacity to do that. But once you get to that point, that's certainly one thing I would consider as a high payoff activity for our franchise owners.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So those are good questions.
Thank you for sharing your expertise.
Yeah, those are really good questions, and I'm looking forward, Sharon, to talking with you in a little more detail on some of this, here in just a little bit. We are coming up on the 2:30 mark, and I told Bret we'd let him go around that time. But before we do, maybe just a couple pieces of advice, Bret, that you might offer to anyone that's, in the same position that you were back in 2008, 2009, where you were, looking at making a huge decision, really a life-changing decision. And I think as long as you have a heartbeat, you're going to have some fear, some uncertainty, and some doubt when it comes to that. And so maybe talk a little bit about, how you dealt with that. Everyone's different, but, what was your experience with that and how did you overcome it?
So I definitely had that, right? I mean, I bought relatively quickly, and I kind of knew it's what I wanted to do. But, when you get the agreement and have to wire the funds, like, it's amazing how that kind of will stop you. I think that the key thing is upfront, really understanding what it is that you want, and kind of writing that down and saying, do I want to be a business owner, and why do I want to do that? And then, does this particular business provide me with my why, and B, are all the people who are doing well at it, do I look like them, or is my skill set going to lend itself well to be successful. And then a little bit of it was, my support team. So as I started to get a little bit of cold feet, I had, friends and people that kind of chimed in and said, here's what you told me, and these things, checks the box. And then it was my wife as well, who was just like, listen, it's what you want to do. Like, you've done a lot of research, you've done anything, like, let's just do it, So, having a good support team around, people that know you and understand you is important. But you will, again, Sharon, whether it's this business or any other franchise, or you will fear that. You will have that fear, uncertainty, doubt. It will be real. But it's just, if you understand clearly what you're looking for in the beginning, I think it becomes a lot easier. And then the other thing is you're going to get to talk to all of my peers, and get an understanding. You're going to realize that when you get into this, you have a bunch of people to sort of help you. So I think that helps. And then my advice is, just again, make sure that whatever it is you're good at and you're passionate about is what it takes to be successful, like in this business. I never wanted to be own a shelf business. But I do really like building teams and kind of helping people and making people happy. And so those are sort of the key components to being successful in this business. And then just follow the model. That's what you're buying into. You'd be surprised at how many people in franchising, and I've seen a bunch of them who buy a business, whether it's ShelfGenie or any other, and then they try to go do things their own way, which is incredibly insane. Don't do that.
Yeah, it's the reason there's a franchise.
Exactly. And it's not to say, like, you'll help make improvements. I mean, that's a great thing about bringing smart people into the business is, they'll come in with a fresh perspective and say, well, why aren't you doing this? I don't know. But most of it's there for you to follow, especially early on.
Yeah, and that's a good point, I think, because Sharon, as you evaluate, different franchise opportunities, that's one thing I'd recommend is really try to get a sense of, because, of course there should be structure and a system and processes that you can follow to learn the business and help you ramp up quicker. But, in my opinion, there's also, a fine balance between the franchisor being so controlling and saying, no, there's only one way to do it. And if you don't do it this way, then you're not doing it the right way. But having that solid process in place, but at the same time allowing for, owners to approach it a little differently. Everyone's got their own style and their own strengths and weaknesses. So while, our successful franchise owners all have very similar strengths, and skill sets, they all also have their own kind of approach and their own perspective to things. And my slightly biased opinion is that ShelfGenie is a good mix of a great system and great processes, but also allowing for owners to implement their own kind of twist on things. And as a system, we're able to learn a lot that way, and continue to improve and evolve the whole organization.
Agreed.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your time and sharing, being so open and transparent with what you've done to be successful, Bret.
Yeah, of course.
And what,
depending upon how far along you get in the process, when you get to that point where you're ready to talk to people like myself, don't excuse me, don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, and
thank you. I appreciate that.
A couple of ways you can connect with Bret. He's on LinkedIn, so you can find him there. And here's his email address. And Sharon, when we talk later, I'll go into some more detail about kind of the steps that you and I will work through together in this process. But certainly once we get to a point in the process, we're going to encourage you to reach out to franchise partners like Bret and set up some time to speak with them one-on-one. So I know Bret would be happy to have another conversation with you one-on-one, and then we'll of course be able to put you in touch with any of the other franchise owners that you may want to speak with. So thank you again for joining and sharing. Really appreciate the good questions. I hope this was kind of a good start. One last question for you, Bret, before we let you go. What book are you reading right now?
I am reading, it's the Tony Robbins book on money management. I am not great with that kind of stuff, understanding sort of index funds versus mutual funds. And, while I've been saving a bunch, just kind of learning the ins and outs. And so that's what I'm reading. And I think it's called Money Master the Game or something.
Yeah, he came out with it a year or two ago. It's one of his newer books, right?
The best book I've read recently is Never Split the Difference, which is by an FBI hostage
Chris Voss
negotiator. That book blew me away. I love that book.
Yeah, that one's on my list, but I've gotten numerous good book recommendations from Bret, so I figured while we have him, I'd ask him. Shoe Dog, fantastic.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks, Sharon.
Best of luck to everybody.
You.
Appreciate your time.
All right, bye-bye.
Have a great day.